Rev up your engines!
Now here's why I am against these state inspections. One of your viewers sent me a picture of a bill he was presented at an inspection station in New York State. They want to charge you $459.19 to inspect his car and replace the tires, saying the tires need replacing. And here's the picture. You know what you can see? You can see he's got all kinds of tread on his tires. That is the problem with these state inspections. That's why a lot of states are getting rid of them. The Canadians did a study a few years back in British Columbia. Over $1 billion a year in Canada, not that large of a country, was wasted on unnecessary repairs by people who were inspecting the cars. I know guys that the only reason they got their state inspection license, you got to get a license to be able to inspect cars, was so they could get business in, rip people off, and charge them for stuff. I saw it over and over and over again. So if you live in a state where you have a state inspection, my advice is, hey, contact the politicians, see if you can get rid of it like other states did. Florida used to have one. They don't anymore. They kept ripping off the old people. The old people got mad. They had a political force, and they said, you're shutting down these inspection stations. Well, in Florida, it was even funnier. The state said, okay, well, we'll do it ourselves. And they did it themselves for 1 year. The state had places where they inspected. They lost so much money, they said, we won't do any now, so they don't do any. People can inspect their own cars and take care of them. You don't need to get ripped off, and I see it all the time. And this guy in New York, they tried to rip him off for $455. He was smart enough to say, no, you're not changing those tires. There's nothing wrong with those tires. If you ever do get something like this, don't pay for anything, just leave. A lot of that stuff's scam. Try to avoid it whenever possible. Jeffrey says, Scotty, what do you think of the new 5-speed Mitsubishi Mirage for a daily conservative driver? Is the manual transmission good? Yeah, that's the best thing to do, is to get a Mitsubishi with the manual. Their automatics are a bit on the weak side. Strangely enough, I was going to film one of those the other day, but the poor guy was driving it over here, and he had a deer, and it totally destroyed the car. They're relatively flimsy cars. I mean, he had a deer, and it wasn't even a full-size deer. It was kind of a junior buck. It had little horns on it, right? And it totally destroyed the car. It's total. They can run a long time. With the standard, they can last quite some time. If you don't mind that size of a car and a ride, kind of a bumpy car that those little ones have, they can last quite some time, especially with the standard transmission, because then it's much simpler. There's no computer involved in shifting the transmission. Not a complex transmission. You shift it, and they generally last a lot longer than the automatic. Brian Harris Brown says, Scotty, I'm looking at a 79 Ford F-150 for 15 grand. Do you think it's a good first car? Okay, 15 grand for a really old Ford. I hope it's been done over. New engine, transmission, whatever, you know? If it's in excellent shape, people love those things. If it's not rotted or rusted out, they're not much on gas. They're gas hogs most of the time. But if you don't mind that, but I hope it had a bunch of work done on it, because it's really old. $15,000 is a reasonable amount of money for a vehicle that is that old. What, 40-something years old. That's a lot of money for a 44-year-old truck. So, hey, let's hope it's in good shape. Vincent K says, Scotty, how often should I change the PCV valve in my 2015 Corolla? Well, I've never changed one in my 94 Celica, because it still works. If you change your oil regularly and use good gasoline, it might last forever. If it acts up, it starts idling weird, gets lean codes, sucking too much air, change it. Now, if you want to change it, go ahead. It's not going to hurt anything. But listen to me, and listen to me closely here. Don't go to a discount auto parts store and buy one, because they sell Chinese crap that your car might not run right when you put it in. Go to the Toyota dealer and buy an original equipment PCV valve. They're not all that expensive. Buy one there and install it. You want the original equipment, because the aftermarket ones, especially the cheap Chinese-made ones, if they're not made right, they have a certain tension. If the tension's wrong, it can make the car run wrong. It can even make the check engine light come on. So don't buy a discount auto parts store. Buy the original equipment one at a dealer, or go online and buy an original equipment one and use that. Don't use a cheap one. Ted Driver says, I got 2019 Honda Civic EX 1.5 turbo, 22,500. I changed the oil, sent it to the oil stone. They said it has 1% fuel in the oil. Should I worry? That's a reasonable amount of fuel in your oil. You're getting some blowback, which some of those turbos do. The first thing I would do, change your oil and filter and use the new GF6 oil. It is made for that. I have had customers with Hondas have a problem like that. They switch to the GF6 oil, and after a couple of oil changes later, like 10,000 miles later, they had hardly any fuel in their oil. Start there. That GF6 oil is made for that, and it's just a name, GF6. It's not a brand. There's many companies that make it. It'll say on the label, just get the ones that are the GF6 oil. Whoever makes it, Valvoline, Exxon, whoever, Castrol, just make sure that it's the GF6 oil, because it's made for that particular engine design. Jack says, I got a code for the knock sensor on my 05 GMC. Is there a way to check if it needs to be replaced or if it's just an old code? First thing, reset it. Have somebody with a scan tool. If you don't know anybody, buy a scan tool for $20 that'll reset the code and drive it around. If it doesn't come back, then yeah, great. If it does come back, odds are your sensor's gone bad and you're going to have to replace the thing because it's either the sensor's gone bad or the wiring or the computer. And on those, generally, it's the sensor itself. Reset it. If it doesn't come back, then it just wasn't reset. On the other hand, if you live in an area like I do in Tennessee, where they don't do car inspections and it runs okay, you can live with the knock sensor not working. It doesn't do all that much anyways. The car runs fine, you don't care. The knock sensor light's on. I've had people driving 10 years that way in Tennessee. No problems at all. But if you live in an area that inspect cars for emissions, you won't be able to get your car inspected and get your sticker, so realize that. Mandrake says, Scotty, got an '08 Sequoia, started leaking coolant into the ignition due to a bad head gasket. Could I use a sealant to actually fix the head gasket and give me some time, or should I just stop until I fix it? I found that the Bars head gasket seal that you can get like AutoZone O'Reilly that costs like $25 works quite well. Give that a try because it can be used with your coolant. Now, if your coolant's all dirty and corroded, first flush it out and put clean stuff in. Then put the sealer in. Never put the sealer in with dirty coolant. Don't do that. Pour the stuff in. And then give it 100 miles of driving. If it seals it, hey, it might last quite some time. You never know. It's not breaking down into your pistons yet. If it's breaking down your pistons and it's not running right, then you're going to have to fix it sooner than later because eventually it won't run at all and there's too much pressure between the piston and the cooling and it'll keep blowing it, right? But in your case, if it's just leaking the coolant somewhere else and not into the piston, the sealer sometimes can last for years. Vale and Mary says, Scotty, will a Subaru Impreza last me 5+ years? I'm living in Canadian Rockies. Or should I get a Corolla hatchback? Well, the Subaru Imprezas aren't bad. I just did a video on one the other day, and I was relatively impressed by the late model ones. But, on the other hand, a Toyota Corolla hatchback is just the rebranded name for my wife's Matrix, 07 Matrix. It's going to run forever. I even showed her a picture of the new one. She said, it looks just like my Matrix, just a little fancier looking. I said, yeah, they just didn't want to call it a Matrix because it looked bad that they keep getting rid of names and bringing them back. I mean, they should have never got rid of it in the first place, but it's the same vehicle, and those things can run forever. So I'm assuming these new Toyota hatchbacks are going to run a really long time. I would rather go the Corolla because they have a track record of lasting 20, 30 years, and the Subaru's track record isn't as good. Now, the new Subarus seem to be better, but still, I don't think they'll ever be as good as the Toyota. Clockwork says, I'm having problems with my 2000 Toyota Tacoma power steering. Would you recommend changing the whole pump? There's only two things that generally go wrong. If they're not leaking, you'd see the leak. You got to fix the leak. If the pump's leaking, you got to replace the pump. If the high pressure hose is leaking, you got to replace the high pressure hose. If the steering rack is leaking at the end, you squeeze the boots and fluid comes out. You got to change the rack, which costs a fortune, right? If you don't have any leaks at all and you got a problem, first try my video, Fixing Binding Power Steering. You flush it out, and that might fix it and it works fine. But if that doesn't work, you would change the pump first, because that's the easiest thing to do. Changing the rack costs a fortune. So do everything in the order I just said and pray for maybe just a hose has gone bad, or if you don't find anything wrong, do change the pump. Archie Pelago says, how do you know if the master cylinder leaks into the brake booster? You're losing brake fluid, so you know it's leaking somewhere, right? Take off the wheels, look at the wheels. If they're dry and not wet, it's not leaking there. Look at the brake hoses. If it's dry, it's not leaking there. You got an anti-lock brake module, look at that, where all the lines come up. If it's dry, it's not leaking there. Then it would have to be leaking into the booster. When you take the master cylinder off, it just has two bolts holding it on, move it out of the way, look inside, you see fluid in there, you know it's leaking there. You can suck it out with a suction pump and pray it didn't damage any inside and just replace the master and give that a try if that's the case. But use those steps, you can easily figure out where it's going. Legend says, Scotty, winter's starting in Michigan. What's the best option to stop salt buildup on my car? Park it in the garage and don't take it out. The only thing you can do is rinse it off. You got no choice. Now, if you got a heated garage, great. Get yourself a power washer, leave it in there, rinse the thing out every once in a while. That's what you'd have to do. Or I went to Niagara Falls in the winter last year, and I was worried the matrix was going to all rusted, so I just bought one of those monthly things for $29, and every day I take it to the car wash, and they rinse the bottom of it off, and keep rinsing it off so it doesn't build up. Other than that, there's nothing you can do. You got to rinse the stuff off. I met a guy from Maine here. He says he just uses his garage that's heated in a garden hose and hoses it off, and when I went under his vehicle that was 10 years old and lived in Maine, it was whistle clean, because he keeps rinsing it off, and he's a fanatic. He did it every single day, and it wasn't rusted. Spartan says, Scotty, I got an '01 Sequoia, 362,000 miles. When it's cold, it doesn't like shifting 3 to 4 and 2 to 3 unless the RPM's above 4K. When it warms up, no issues at all. Any suggestions? Yeah, warm it up. That's old age, baby. That's just old age. You got 362,000 miles on a humongous Sequoia. They call them Sequoias because they're the size of the Sequoia trees, right? Warm it up and live with it. If it was lower mileage, I'd say, well, change the filter and fluid and put in full synthetic transmission fluid because it flows better when it's cold, right? But with that kind of mileage, I wouldn't touch it. You take the fluid out with 362 and put new fluid in, it might not even move. It might be too slippery and it might not even work. So warm it up and live with what it's doing because that's just old age and cold weather's affecting it. Maybe park it in a heated garage, or if you want, maybe put a heater into the automatic transmission system. They make them so it'll keep the transmission fluid warm and then it'd be warmed up instantaneously. So you didn't have to warm it up. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.